The Legend of Admir, Chapter 5, Darkest Fear. Admir was woefully unprepared, plain and simple. In the next room, he narrowly avoided a giant hole in the floor. He couldn't help but imagine what would have happened had he'd fallen. Twisted ankle, dying of starvation and thirst, or worse, becoming a spider's next meal. In the room after that, he was almost entombed in rubble and his path was closed off. Again, the dying of starvation and thirst. No one would have found him here, except perhaps the cultists, and he wasn't sure if he wanted their help. He took a moment to practice his magic, unsure of what else the place had in store for him. The fog worked well last time, but the clones were his go-to against the creatures within the ruins so far, so he fine-tuned a quick set of clones he could throw up at a moment's notice. In another room, he made an improvised weapon, with a particularly pointy tip. He felt a little more prepared, even though he knew his preparations wouldn't amount to much. He practically flew through the next room, with its horrible stench and precarious floor. He feared stopping for too long. He'd already wasted precious daylight, and he wanted to be done with this place as soon as possible. Illusion becomes reality here. Inside, you'll face your darkest fear. He did not want to find out what his darkest fear was anytime soon. In the next room, he found another spider and attempted to distract it with flashing lights, capitalizing on his newfound understanding of their light sensitivity, and eventually used his makeshift weapon to try to make a literal dent in it. He did, by the way. A small dent, but a dent nonetheless. By the time he managed to escape it, he was covered in webbing and his nerves were fried. Admir slumped against the wall in the next room and took the time to catch his breath. He was sweaty, and every sound the ruins made sent his eyes darting all around. The place was actively trying to kill him, and there wasn't even a promise of finding what he was looking for. Help me. The source of the voice was not immediately visible, because why would the voice be coming from within what Admir was now calling a cocoon? It moved a bit as another plea floated through the room. Admir tiptoed to get a better look at it, discovering a person mid-escape on the other side, emaciated and bound by webbing. How long had he been there? So... Admir looked around for something he could use to break the cocoon. Hungry. Admir froze. The man ripped himself free and fell to the floor with a sickening crunch and scrambled towards Admir, blackened mouth drooling just like the woman from before. He tried to throw up an illusion of the first distracting thing he could think of, another spider, but the man ignored it and slashed at his arm. Admir screamed out in pain and stumbled back, hand gripping his fresh wound. In an instant, his body temperature flared, a sudden fever taking over him and making him woozy. Darkest fear. Admir couldn't help but imagine his death, being ripped apart by the monstrosity before him. What if it didn't finish the job and left him to bleed out? What if something worse came and slowly gnawed at him, still alive through it all, unable to die fast enough to end his suffering? He screamed and his prepared illusory clone sprang into existence. He was determined to not die here today, or any day. The man had been alert before, but now seemed sufficiently distracted, even just a bit, by his illusions. Good. It wasted time swiping the clones as they jerked and dodged out of the way, buying Admir precious time to find a way out. It clawed through a clone and began ignoring it while Admir took a moment to duck behind some of the debris. He threw up a few more illusory chunks of stone around him to hide him from view while he formulated a plan. There was only one exit from the room, and the creature was close enough to make it risky. So, Admir dug deep, deep down within himself, and let loose as much of his power that he could muster. He'd never done something like this before. 10, 20, 30, 50 clones of Admir appeared, all focused on distracting the man creature. Admir sent his clone back the way he came, sending the man creature to chase after them while he slipped away. The next area he found himself in looked much like the previous one, though with less debris and cocoons with nasty surprises. A large, mostly intact staircase sat off to one of the sides, water dripping on it and to the ground from some unseen crack in the blocked-off upper floor. At its base, what looked to be a pile of sand or dust, or food that had been left to waste away. Lovely. His wound tingled and he remembered he'd been injured. Okay, injured was being gracious at this point. He was bleeding pretty badly, his wounds from his previous tussles with the outlaw and the spiders adding up, and his breath caught in his chest. The wound where he'd been slashed just now was black and green and purple. It oozed and... how was it infected already? His stomach rumbled and it took every ounce of strength in him to stop himself from mentally thinking the word hungry. Oh, well, that failed. And now he was more scared than he was before. Was he going to turn into him? Into her? Had the cultists done this? A previous experiment gone wrong? Is that why they targeted that woman? He needed real medical help, but turning back now would mean facing every single challenge he'd simply avoided all over again. He'd exhausted himself physically and magically, and he wasn't sure he could take another... He ducked out of the way almost fast enough, avoiding the larger chunk of stone that fell, but a smaller bit knocked him aside the head and forced him to the floor. His breathing got harder and... well, Admir cried. He was in complete pain. His head, both arms, and an infection coursing through his veins, threatening to turn him into something terrifying. He just cried. He couldn't go back, and yet he couldn't push on either. Not right now. He needed to rest, but he couldn't rest here. But he couldn't not. More tears, the fear welling up and forcing its way out. He had no other choice. From some hidden well of strength, Admir threw up a few more illusions, exhausting himself even further. Fear will do that to you, force you to scrape up whatever power you can find and use it because surviving is the most important thing. Safe, or at least safer. By the stairs in a shadowy crevice, he bandaged up the wounds he could, using some of the healing ointment. And, against his better judgment, Admir let himself close his eyes. Naturally, nightmares awaited him. Winton led Kaito through the moonlit maze of the palace, cloaked in the shadows of every corner. They didn't have long before Kaito's absence would be noticed, so they needed to utilize every second to its maximum. Room after room, hallway through hallway, Winton snaked around corners, hid in dark crevices, and eluded the few patrolling guards with expertise and efficiency. Kaito was thoroughly impressed and still amazed to have somehow connected with this man that should have been his enemy. Just last week, he'd been sleeping on the streets, wondering if he was even suited for this quest. And here he was now, running through the palace walls after having escaped from the dungeons with the help of a guard he'd just met. Winton vanished from Kaito's sight for 2 seconds around a corner. When Kaito joined him, ready to press on, he found a guard dead on the floor and Winton stabbed in the side. "Go, quickly!" Winton urged, wincing in pain. He swatted away Kaito's helping hand. "She's in that room over there. Go!" He had come here with a mission and quickly stilled his resolve. Nothing could deter him from getting the answers he sought. That had always been his motto, no matter how dark or grim the path forward seemed. Hopefully, Winton and he could share a pint in the future. "I'll never forget your kindness." Kaito rushed forward, hoping to elude any other guards and make it to the Queen's room. Admir woke with a start, body drenched in sweat, his infection screaming in pain, sending nauseating jolts throughout his body. His left hand felt a little numb, his breath was ragged, and that nightmare had felt so real, but now that he was trying to focus on the details, they were slipping from him. All he could grasp from the now vague imagery was overwhelming energy and perhaps being incapacitated. It didn't make sense, but he instinctively knew it had something to do with his heritage, his history, his entire reason for coming to these dangerous ruins. It was pitch black. Admir had slept far longer than he had intended, but he was glad to see that nothing had accosted him while he rested. He stood up carefully, head feeling much better. It was colder now, the sun's light completely gone. The moonlight had a much harder time finding its way through the cracks of the ruins, filling the space with an eerie vibe that put him even more on edge. The sounds of nighttime insects droned just past the walls, that not silent noise from earlier in the day, now an odd hum, almost. Navigating the ruins would be much harder now, especially if new nighttime terrors wanted to wake up. Hoping he wasn't making a huge mistake, he bundled up as much of the camping gear he could and made a makeshift torch, keeping a flimsy pocket knife on him just in case. Then he set out to delve further into the ruins.